Alternative explanations are often ignored explanations of the phenomenon in question. In many situations, it is tempting to believe that because an explanation agrees with the known facts, it must therefore be the correct explanation. For instance, a researcher attempting to show that musical ability is largely inherited might examine the musical ability of a large number of children of talented musicians and compare this with the ability of children from non-musical families. It would not be surprising in such a study to discover a significant correlation between being a very good musician and one or both of your parents being musical themselves. If the researcher had a vested interest in finding this correlation, maybe some funding could be dependent on it, then he or she may look no further for possible alternative explanations. Can you think of an alternative explanation? Children of musicians are far more likely to be taught to play a musical instrument from an early age than are other children. Or there may be a combination of both hereditary and environmental factors at work. In everyday life, our judgments and decision-making can follow tried and trusted pathways, laid down over years, and we seldom stop to challenge these familiar paths by asking about alternative views or solutions. I cover this topic in depth in my creative thinking course. Anecdotal evidence comes from selected stories, either of what has happened to you or to somebody you know. In many cases, this is very weak evidence and typically involves generalizing from a particular case. Somebody might tell you that their friend tried acupuncture for a back pain and that it seemed to work wonders. On its own, this is merely anecdotal evidence. One of the main risks here is that the details of the story may get changed in the retelling. To believe on the basis of one story that acupuncture could improve your particular back pain would be unwise. You would have to know how acupuncture could work for you and also be aware that your friend's recovery could have been spontaneous and would have taken place anyway without any intervention. How many times in our everyday life do we give anecdotal evidence a far more important place in our decision making than we should? Somebody told somebody told somebody, and on the basis of hearing a second or third-hand account, we judge people and situations without question. Circumstantial evidence in law is evidence not drawn from direct observation of a fact in issue. If a witness testifies that he saw a defendant fire a bullet into the body of a person who then died, this is direct testimony of material facts in murder. And the only question is whether the witness is telling the truth. If, however, the witness is able to testify only that he heard the shot and that he arrived on the scene seconds later to see the accused standing over the corpse with a smoking pistol in his hand, the evidence is circumstantial. The accused may have been shooting at the escaping killer or merely have been a bystander who picked up the weapon after the killer had dropped it. Circumstantial evidence allows for more than one explanation. The notion that one cannot be convicted on circumstantial evidence is, of course, false. Most criminal convictions are based on circumstantial evidence, although it must be adequate to meet established standards of proof. Economy with the truth is selective withholding of information with intent to deceive. Some people tell themselves that this is not as bad as lying, but both actions involve deliberate deception. The main difference seems to be that lying is usually easier to prove than cases of being economical with the truth. For instance, if a Garda were to stop you late at night and ask if you had been drinking that evening, and you were to answer not a drop, beside the fact that you had been drinking all afternoon, but not evening, then you would be guilty of deception even though you had not lied. In drawing up a report, you may decide not to include findings that could undermine years of work or cast doubt on your conclusions. In that instance, you are being economical with the truth and choosing just the right amount of truth to agree with your conclusions. Always ask the question when presented with a conclusive statement: is there more to this conclusion than what I am being told? Irrelevance has been described as shifting discussion away from the point at issue by bringing in matters which don't relate directly to it. This can be due to a lack of mental focus or a failure to appreciate precisely what is at issue. Some politicians avoid giving straightforward answers to direct questions by deliberately introducing irrelevant facts or opinions. While listening to somebody not answering a direct question directly can be irritating, there are some situations where being irrelevant can have serious consequences. Many students still do not answer the questions asked of them in state examination papers, but rush into writing answers to questions that they would like to have been asked. With the points rates for university not likely to get less competitive, irrelevance could cost a student dearly. Poisoning the well is attempting to ridicule a position by insulting its source. One way of poisoning the well is to begin a sentence with, "No one could possibly believe that. Only a fool would argue that. Or some naive people believe." Or some similar phrase. By labelling anyone opposed to large-scale immigration a racist, the speaker here leaves little room for his or her opponent to manoeuvre without appearing to be a racist. Put this way, this is a mere assertion. Argument in support of the position is needed, otherwise it is simply a technique for making those with whom the speaker disagrees afraid to make their point. The best way to confront this is with a straightforward denial of the poisonous element of the statement, followed by an explanation of why your position is a reasonable one to hold. Reductio ad absurdum, or reduction to the absurd, is proving a position is false by showing that if true, it would lead to absurd consequences. Consider an example. A politician might argue that a good way of increasing the general tax take would be to investigate every taxpayer's returns thoroughly, thereby clamping down on tax evasion. However, in practice, this would cost far more to carry out than could possibly be reclaimed, and so can be seen to lead to the absurd consequence that a scheme for increasing tax would end up by reducing it. Research has shown that is a phrase often used to persuade the listener that the speaker can back up what he or she is saying with firm evidence. However, it is extremely vague to claim that research has shown anything, unless you can back up the claim with specific details about the alleged research. Questions such as what methods were used and what precisely did they find should spring to mind. What other questions should you ask? Maybe, have the results been confirmed by other workers in the same field? Is the research up to date? Has the research been peer-reviewed? Some, all confusion. When making a statement, always make clear you are talking about some or all if the need arises. Sometimes people leave out the words some or all in order to make the pronouncements appear stronger than they really are. Coloured people are, Mexicans are, Muslims are. By putting some in front of these examples, the person feels they're not saying very much at all. So they attempt to make a bolder statement. The problem here is that if you do not use a qualifier, a single exception to any of these examples will contradict your claim. Truth by consensus. Truth by consensus is taking statements to be true simply because they are generally agreed upon. This is not a reliable way of discovering the truth on most issues. Just because there is general agreement that something is true, it doesn't follow that it is true. In the 14th century, there was general agreement that the world was flat, but it does not follow from the fact that most people thought it was flat that it was actually flat. If the experts of the day believe something to be the case, this may make it likely that what they believe is true, or at least approaches the truth. There is no guarantee, though, that scientific theories that are accepted by eminent scientists working in a particular field today will be considered true tomorrow. New evidence has the potential to undermine any widely held belief. However, it is not the fact that experts agreeing about something makes it true. Rather, it is that the truth of their belief depends on whether or not it matches up with the way the world is. However, if you are not an expert, it would be appropriate to treat the consensus view of experts in a particular field very seriously. When people in agreement are not experts, and some of them know very little about the matter in question, there is no good reason for treating their agreement as an indicator of truth. One reason why consensus is not a reliable indicator of truth is that people are often very gullible and easily misled about all kinds of things. We believe what we wish were true, even if it does not match up to the facts, and sometimes even in the face of overwhelming evidence contradicting our cherished beliefs. On most important questions, the majority of the people are ill-informed on what is at stake. It is surely better to rely on a minority of experts who have had the time to study the data rather than the hastily formed views of the majority. Consequently, when somebody begins a sentence with, "it is generally agreed upon," or "most people believe that," you should determine precisely what is meant by that statement. What does it matter what is generally believed? It is important not to confuse this attack on the belief in truth by majority opinion with an attack on democratic decision-making. The reason why democratic decision procedures are often preferable to other alternatives is not that they reliably give true answers to questions, but that they allow for equal participation of different interest groups and usually provide ways of minimizing the power of would-be tyrants. Universal expertise is the idea that proficiency in one field is taken as an indicator of proficiency in an unrelated one. Experts in one field often feel confident to comment on another area about which they know far less. The shortness of human life means that many highly intelligent people are relatively poorly informed on a wide range of issues. It is just not possible to be an expert on everything. Vested interests have been described as having a personal investment in the outcome of a discussion and standing to gain if a particular conclusion is reached. People who have vested interests in particular outcomes often distort evidence or are economical with the truth in order to achieve their desired end. For instance, a mortgage advisor might have a vested interest in persuading a house buyer to take out a certain type of mortgage because he or she stands to make a substantial commission from the transaction. This might lead him or her to stress the merits of this type of mortgage over other types. The mortgage advisor may not resort to lying, but need only be economical with the truth. Even where you might expect rigorous impartiality, for example in the field of scientific research, you still may have vested interest at work. For instance, getting a further research grant may be dependent on producing results within a given time frame. The researcher may consciously or unconsciously give more weight to certain research findings, while playing down or ignoring findings that may not suit him or her to publish. If I were to point out in the course of a discussion that such a person has a vested interest in a particular outcome, what type of move would that be? That would be an ad hominem move, because such a statement in itself in no way demonstrates that that person is less than impartial. Their arguments need to be examined and the evidence they give assessed. Nevertheless, the discovery of vested interest should alert you to the possibility of bias in the way that reasons and evidence are put across. Wishful thinking is believing that because it would be nice if something were true, then it must actually be true. This way of thinking is very common and very tempting because it allows us to avoid unpleasant truths. For example, someone who drinks 8 pints of beer a day might persuade himself that it has no effect whatsoever on his health. This is very likely wishful thinking, since this amount of alcohol is significantly above medically approved levels of consumption. In order to maintain the belief that the drink has no effect on his health, the drinker would probably have to ignore various symptoms or attribute them to other causes. Can you think of other examples of wishful thinking?